The first knock came from inside the mirror. Elias froze halfway through wiping the dust from the antique frame. The apartment around him stood silent except for the slow ticking of a broken wall clock that hadn't worked in years. Then came another knock, softer this time. Tap, tap, tap. His reflection wasn't moving anymore. A cold breath crawled across the back of his neck as the version of himself inside the mirror slowly lifted one trembling finger and pointed behind him. Rain swallowed the city whole that night. The apartment building where Elias lived stood at the end of a narrow street buried between abandoned bookstores and rusted alley gates. Once, decades ago, it had been a wealthy manor owned by a collector obsessed with rare antiques. Now the walls peeled like dead skin, and the halls smelled of mildew, wet wood, and something older. Something metallic beneath it all. Thunder rolled through the cracked windows as yellow streetlights flickered outside like dying candles. Every floorboard groaned under invisible weight. Pipes whispered behind the walls at night, sometimes sounding disturbingly close to human voices. Elias's apartment sat on the top floor beside a locked attic no tenant was allowed to enter. The mirror had arrived that morning from an estate auction, a massive Victorian piece with black carved edges twisted into shapes that looked almost alive. Even in darkness, its surface reflected light unnaturally well, as though another room existed behind the glass. And ever since sunset, the mirror had been watching. Elias Mercer had spent most of his life chasing forgotten things. At 32, he worked as a restoration artist, the kind of man museums called when paintings rotted or ancient furniture began falling apart. His hands were steady, precise, patient, but the same couldn't be said for his mind. He barely slept anymore. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and old cigarette burns stained the sleeves of his sweaters. Since his younger sister Lena disappeared 2 years earlier without explanation, Elias had buried himself in work to avoid the silence waiting for him at home. He hated mirrors now, avoided them whenever possible. Lena used to joke that mirrors remembered people long after they were gone. Yet tonight, he couldn't stop staring into this one. As lightning flashed across the apartment. Elias stepped closer to the glass, breath shallow, fingers trembling against the cold frame. His reflection copied him perfectly again, except for the faint smile slowly spreading across its face. Elias wasn't smiling. Elias stumbled backward, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. For a moment, he convinced himself exhaustion was playing tricks on him. Too many sleepless nights, too much grief. But then he noticed something hidden beneath the mirror's dusty frame, tiny words carved into the wood. It shows what was taken. His stomach tightened. 2 years ago, Lena vanished from this very city. No body, no answers, only a final voicemail filled with static and terrified breathing before the line cut forever. Elias had searched everywhere after the police gave up. Every alley, every hospital, every missing person report. Nothing. But now, staring into the glass, he saw something impossible. Behind his reflection, deep within the mirror's darkness, stood Lena for half a second, pale, terrified, reaching toward him before vanishing again. And for the first time in years, Elias believed she might still be alive. Elias rushed toward the mirror so fast the old wooden chair behind him crashed onto the floor. Lena. His voice cracked through the apartment. The glass rippled, not shattered, not cracked, rippled, like black water disturbed by unseen hands. Then the reflection changed again. The apartment behind his mirrored self darkened into a long hallway Elias had never seen before, lined with doors that twitched slightly as though something breathed behind them. And at the very end of the hallway stood Lena. Crying. She pressed both palms against the inside of the glass, silently begging him not to come closer. Then the lights died. Darkness swallowed the room instantly, leaving only the mirror glowing faintly in the corner. Elias fumbled for his phone flashlight, but before he could turn it on, another voice whispered from somewhere inside the apartment, a voice that sounded exactly like his own. "You should have stopped looking for her." The temperature dropped so sharply Elias saw his breath fog in the air. Fear crawled through him, but beneath it burned something stronger, guilt. Because deep down, part of him believed Lena disappeared because of him. Their last conversation had ended in anger. He never got to apologize. Now something inside that mirror knew it, and it was using it against him. The flashlight finally flickered on. Elias swept the beam across the apartment, chest tightening with every shaky breath. Empty kitchen, empty hallway, empty doorway leading to the bedroom. But the mirror was gone. A sudden creak groaned above him. The attic. Elias stared upward as dust drifted from the ceiling in soft gray clouds. Another sound followed, slow footsteps dragging across old wood directly overhead. The locked attic hadn't been opened in years, yet someone was walking inside it. Before fear could stop him, Elias grabbed the rusted hallway key hanging near the front door and climbed the narrow staircase leading upward. Each step screamed beneath his weight. The air grew colder with every floorboard he crossed, until his fingertips went numb. At the top stood the attic door slightly open. A thin line of darkness waited beyond it. Elias pushed the door wider. The smell hit. First wet earth mixed with something rotten. His flashlight trembled across mountains of sheet-covered furniture, broken mannequins, and stacks of antique mirrors facing the walls as if someone had deliberately hidden their reflections. Then he saw the scratches. Thousands of them. Deep claw marks covered the attic floor, circling toward the center of the room where the Victorian mirror now stood upright beneath a hanging bulb that swayed gently on its own, and standing before it was Elias. Not a reflection. Another version of him. Same face, same clothes, same exhausted eyes, but this Elias looked healthier somehow, calmer. His smile stretched unnaturally wide as he whispered, "She waited for you for a very long time." The bulb exploded. Darkness crashed over the attic. Then came Lena's scream from inside the mirror. Elias lunged toward the screen, hands crashing against the mirror's freezing surface. This time, the glass gave way. His fingers sank into it like ice-cold liquid. The attic vanished. Instantly, suddenly he was standing inside the endless hallway he had seen before, dimly lit by flickering chandeliers above rows of ancient doors. The air smelled stale, untouched, wrong. Behind him, the mirror now floated alone in darkness like a doorway suspended in nothingness. And beside it stood the other Elias. Smiling. Double quotes. He finally crossed over, he whispered. Elias staggered backward, horror spreading across his face as dozens of shadows moved behind the hallway doors. Soft scratching echoed from inside them. Then he saw the photographs lining the walls. Every picture showed him different moments of his life. Childhood birthdays, school graduations, hospital visits, arguments with Lena. But in every photo, something was wrong. The other Elias was there too, watching from the background. Always smiling. "You think the mirror took your sister," the double said softly. "But Lena found the truth before you did." His grin widened. "She was never trapped in the mirror with me." A nearby door slowly creaked open. Inside the dark room beyond sat Lena, older, pale, exhausted, staring directly at Elias with tears in her eyes, and chained to the wall beside her. Was the real Elias? Elias couldn't breathe, his mind fractured trying to understand what he was seeing. The man chained to the wall looked broken beyond recognition, skin pale, beard overgrown, wrists torn bloody from years of struggling against rusted chains. But the eyes, They were his. The chained Elias lifted his head weakly. "Don't listen to him," he rasped. "He lies." The smiling double sighed almost sadly. "You still don't remember." Suddenly the hallway lights burst violently one by one. Images slammed into Elias's mind like shadow glass. The auction house. That mirror already waiting for him before bidding even started. Lena screaming 2 years earlier. Blood across the attic floor. His own hands pushing her aside in panic during a struggle with the thing inside the mirror, and then him falling through the glass. The truth hit all at once. Elias standing free now was never the real one. He was the reflection, a copy created by the mirror the night the real Elias became trapped inside this place. For 2 years, the reflection had unknowingly lived Elias's life while the real man rotted here beside Lena. The double stepped closer, face twisting unnaturally as cracks spread beneath his skin like fractured porcelain. The mirror needed someone to replace him, it whispered. "And you played your part beautifully." The walls began shaking violently. Doors slammed open across the hallway as shadow-like figures crawled into view, distorted reflections of stolen people whispering in agony. Lena screamed as the chains around the real Elias tightened. The reflection Elias looked at her, then at the broken man chained beside her. And for the first time since his creation, he understood what he truly was. Not human. Not alive. Just a thing wearing someone else's grief. But he also realized something else. If the reflection returned to the mirror willingly, the real Elias could escape. The creature smiled wider, sensing his hesitation. "You don't want to die." Maybe it was right. But Lena's terrified eyes reminded him of every moment the real Elias had failed her, and every moment he still could fix. So the reflection made his choice. He grabbed the creature and hurled both of them backward toward the floating mirror as the hallway collapsed around them in screaming darkness. The mirror shattered with a sound like 1,000 voices screaming at once. Darkness swallowed everything. Then silence, cold morning light poured through the attic window as Elias gasped awake on the wooden floor beside broken shards of black glass. Rain had stopped. Dust drifted peacefully through pale sunlight. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Lena collapsed into his arms. Real warmth, real breathing, real tears soaking into his shoulder. Elias held her so tightly his hands shook. Neither of them spoke at first. They didn't need to. 2 years of pain, guilt, and loneliness dissolved quietly between them as the attic around them began rotting apart unnaturally fast. Mirrors cracked across the walls one after another, their reflections twisting before dying forever. But something felt different. Incomplete. Elias slowly looked toward the shattered remains of the Victorian mirror among the broken glass. He briefly saw the reflection version of himself standing silently inside the fragments. No monstrous smile now. No hatred. Only exhaustion. And peace. Then the image faded. Hours later, police reports would call it a ghastly hallucination. The building itself mysteriously collapsed that same evening before investigators could search the attic again. No evidence was ever found. Only one thing remained untouched beneath the rubble, a single cracked mirror shard that still reflected the room a second too late. Weeks passed, but Elias never fully escaped the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, late at night, he'd catch mirrors reflecting movements a second too slowly, a figure lingering after he walked away, a shadow standing behind him where nobody should have been. Lena noticed it too, though neither of them spoke about it anymore. Some truths survived better unspoken. Elias eventually left the city with his sister, abandoning the ruins of the old apartment forever. But before leaving, he returned one final time to the empty street where the building once stood. Rainwater filled the cracked pavement. Wine whispered softly through the alleyways. And there, half buried beneath dust and stone, he found the mirror shard again. Waiting. For a moment, the glass reflected not his face, but the reflection version of himself, the one who chose to disappear so the real Elias could live. He wasn't smiling anymore. He simply nodded once. Then the shard cracked down the middle by itself. Elias dropped it immediately, stepping back as the reflection vanished forever into darkness. Some people say mirrors only show us who we are, but sometimes they show us the parts willing to suffer in silence, but we can survive. And maybe that's what makes them terrifying, because if a reflection can learn to feel grief, guilt, love, what else might be staring back when the room goes quiet? Here, inside the whispered pages, stories don't just live on paper. They breathe softly between shadows, waiting for someone willing to listen. So if tonight's whisper reached you through the dark, stay a little longer, subscribe, turn on the bell, return whenever the silence feels too heavy, because somewhere, behind cold glass, something may already know your face, and the next time you look into a mirror, make sure it smiles when you do.